A young boy from a small town in northwest Canada vanished during a youth soccer game, leaving his parents with a void even time couldn't fill. But 4 years later, his father opens the coach's locker, and what he sees makes him gasp. The persistent drizzle that had misted over Riverview Hollow for most of the late afternoon was finally beginning to relent, though the air remained heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. The town, nestled in the Pacific Northwest of Canada, was a place of contrasts. Old, sprawling properties with histories etched into their weathered wood stood shoulder to shoulder with newer, more uniform suburban developments. For Reynold Mercer, the town held both cherished memories and an ever-present ache. 4 years ago, his life had been irrevocably fractured when his 10-year-old son, Aidan, vanished from a soccer game, swallowed by an afternoon much like this one, leaving behind a void that time had failed to fill. Now, as the main youth soccer coach, every game, every cheer, every triumphant shout from a young player was a bittersweet echo of what he had lost. On this particular late Friday afternoon, however, a genuine, unforced smile touched Reynolds' lips. He stood on the slightly muddy field of the Riverview Youth Athletics Complex, the cheers of his current team, a different group of boys from 4 years prior, still ringing in the cool air. They had just clinched a small local tournament, and the energy was palpable. His colleague, Derek Maddox, the team's second coach, stood beside him, a more reserved figure, but sharing in the quiet satisfaction of the win. "All right, lads, gather round, Reynold called out, his voice warm and carrying easily over the dispersing crowd of parents and onlookers. The boys, flushed with victory and adrenaline, quickly formed a semicircle around their coaches. Their red and white team jackets, emblazoned with the town's crest, were splattered with mud, a testament to their hard-fought game. That was an incredible performance out there today, Reynold beamed, his gaze sweeping over each eager face. Every single one of you played your hearts out, and you deserved this win. I'm so proud of you all." A chorus of "Thanks, Coach," and happy whoops erupted. "To celebrate," Reynold continued, his eyes twinkling, "how about a BBQ at my place tonight? Burgers, hot dogs, the works. What do you say?" The suggestion was met with a roar of approval. The boys' faces lit up with excitement, their earlier fatigue momentarily forgotten at the prospect of an impromptu party. They chattered animatedly amongst themselves, already debating who would eat the most hot dogs. Coach Derek, however, cleared his throat, a slight frown creasing his brow. He was a man of routine and order, and spontaneity wasn't his strong suit. "Reynold, perhaps that's not the best idea," he interjected, his tone measured. "This is rather sudden. I'm not sure all the parents will be on board with such short notice, or even available. And," he added, glancing up at the sky where dark clouds were beginning to gather more ominously, "the weather doesn't look too promising for an outdoor barbecue. The wind's picking up too." Reynold, ever the optimist, waved a dismissive hand. "Ah, don't worry about the parents, Derek. I'll give them all a call, smooth things over. Or, hey, if a BBQ is too much, we can just do dinner at my place. We can grab a massive takeaway from somewhere, pizza, Chinese, whatever you lads fancy." The boys cheered again, their enthusiasm undiminished. Derek, however, remained unconvinced. "I appreciate the thought, Reynold, but I already have plans for this evening," he stated, his voice firm but polite. "Perhaps we could postpone the celebration until tomorrow? It's Saturday, a more appropriate time for a get-together. It would give everyone, including the families, ample time to prepare and coordinate." Reynold considered this. He saw the logic in Derek's suggestion, and the initial burst of excitement in the boy's eyes had dimmed slightly at the mention of parental approval and potential rain. "You know what, Derek? You're probably right," Reynold conceded with a sigh, then forced a smile. "Tomorrow sounds fine. A Saturday BBQ it is. That'll give us plenty of time to chat with your folks," he said, winking at the boys, "and get all the good stuff." He noticed their slightly deflated expressions. "But hey," he added, trying to salvage the immediate celebratory mood, "how about we don't wait until tomorrow for everything? Let's at least go grab a celebratory milkshake at Rosie's Diner down the road. My treat." This suggestion was met with renewed, albeit slightly less boisterous, enthusiasm. As the team began to gather their gear, their chatter turning to favorite milkshake flavors, Reynolds' phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face at the interruption, but his expression changed instantly when he saw the caller ID. His wife, Sarah. "Excuse me for a moment, everyone," he said, stepping away from the group. "Sarah, hi, what's up?" Her voice on the other end was a mixture of anxiety and fragile hope. "Reynold, the police just called. They have an update on Aiden's case." Reynolds' heart lurched. An update? After 4 long years of dead ends and fading hopes? "What kind of update?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, trying to keep the tremor out of it. Someone claims to have seen him," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Yesterday, in a different town. Cedar Ridge, they called it. It's about a 3-hour drive from here. The police want us to come down to the station. They have some footage they want us to look at." Cedar Ridge. The name meant nothing to him, yet it now held a sliver of terrifying, desperate possibility. "Okay, Sarah. Okay, I'll meet you there. I'm leaving right now." He hung up, his mind reeling. The victory, the BBQ, the milkshakes, it all faded into insignificance. He walked back to the team, his face pale, the earlier joviality completely gone. The boys and Derek looked at him with concern. "Guys," Reynolds began, his voice strained, I'm so sorry, but I have to leave." "Right now? The police? They've received a new clue about Aiden. They need me at the station." A hush fell over the group. The boys, young as they were, understood the gravity of his words. They had all heard stories about Coach Reynolds' missing son. It was a quiet sorrow that permeated their close-knit soccer community. They murmured words of understanding and wished him well, their affection for him evident in their somber expressions. "Coach Derek," Reynolds said, turning to his colleague, "would you mind still taking the boys for that milkshake? I'll catch up with you all later about the BBQ plans for tomorrow." He paused, a wave of guilt washing over him for abandoning his responsibilities. "Is that okay? Leaving you to manage the team alone?" Derek nodded, though his expression was hard to read. There wasn't much enthusiasm, perhaps a hint of resignation at the prospect of chaperoning a dozen sugar-fueled boys by himself. "Yeah, of course, Reynolds. That's fine. You go. Don't worry about us." Reynolds nodded gratefully. "Thanks, Derek. Oh, one more thing. Have you paid the referee yet?" In their small youth league, it was customary for the club or coaches to handle the referee's modest fee directly, rather than it being managed by a larger state or league association. It was more hobby soccer, after all. "No, not yet," Derek replied. "All right, I'll take care of it then," Reynolds said. "I'll just grab the cash from the team locker quickly and pay him on my way out." Just as Reynolds was about to head towards the locker rooms, Derek stopped him. "Actually, Reynolds, let me do it. You should just get to the station. Don't worry about it." "No, it's fine, really," Reynolds insisted. "I need to grab my change of clothes from my locker anyway. It'll only take a second." Derek hesitated for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Then he seemed to make a decision. "Okay, fine," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small key attached to a worn lanyard. "Here's the key to the team locker. I just thought I had some personal items in there, but I remember now I moved them." He handed it over to Reynolds. Reynolds took the key, a brief, almost imperceptible frown touching his lips at Derek's slightly odd explanation. But his mind was already miles away, racing towards the police station and the faint, terrifying glimmer of hope that awaited him there. The corridor leading to the locker rooms at the Riverview Youth Athletics Complex was cool and dimly lit, a stark contrast to the fading daylight and lingering excitement outside. The rhythmic thud of Reynolds' footsteps echoed slightly on the linoleum floor, each step carrying him further into a whirlwind of emotions. His primary focus was the police station, the potential lead on Aiden, but the mundane task of retrieving the referee's payment from the team locker offered a momentary distraction. He reached the designated locker, its metal door painted the same institutional beige as the others lining the wall. The key Derek had given him slid easily into the lock. With a soft click, the door swung open, revealing the usual jumble of team equipment, spare jerseys, first aid kits, and the distinct lingering scent of sweat and liniment. Reynolds' eyes scanned the interior, searching for the team's cash envelope. He knew Derek usually kept it tucked away safely. He spotted it peeking out from underneath Derek's neatly folded team jacket and a worn backpack that Derek often carried. Carefully, he lifted the jacket and backpack, the fabric of the jacket cool against his hand. He retrieved the envelope, counted out the required amount for the referee, and then meticulously placed the envelope back where he had found it, ensuring it was still concealed. As he was about to close the locker, a small, crumpled piece of paper dislodged itself from the inner folds of Derek's jacket and fluttered silently to the floor. It landed face down. Reynolds bent down to pick it up, intending to simply tuck it back into the jacket pocket or leave it on the shelf. It was just a receipt, probably for some personal purchase of Derek's, and none of his business. He picked it up, his fingers brushing against the thin, flimsy paper. He was about to crumple it further and place it back when a few printed words, stark against the white, snagged his attention. His gaze, initially indifferent, sharpened with an almost painful intensity. The receipt was from a general store, but what made Reynolds' breath catch in his throat was the list of items purchased. Strawberry Pinwheel Hard Candies, X12, Graph Puzzle Book, Level 5, Difficulty X1. Thermal Blankets, Child Size, X1. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through Reynolds. Strawberry Pinwheel, Hard Candies. Aiden had adored them, his absolute favorite. He'd always have a few tucked away in his pockets, their sugary sweetness, a small comfort. And the Graph Puzzle Book, Level 5. The specificity of it hit Reynolds like a physical blow. Aiden had been obsessed with those particular puzzle books, devouring them every weekend. He was bright, and Level 5 was always his preferred challenge. Anything less, he declared, was too easy, Dad. The child-sized thermal blankets. A shiver traced its way down Reynolds' spine. Why would Derek, a single man with no children of his own, no nieces or nephews that Reynolds knew of, be buying these specific items? And 12 packets of candy? His mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, any explanation that didn't lead down the dark, terrifying path that was beginning to form in his thoughts. Perhaps Derek had a godchild he'd never mentioned? Or maybe he was buying them for a charity drive? But the combination of items, so uniquely Aiden, was too coincidental, too jarring. Reynolds' hand tightened around the crumpled receipt. A wave of nausea washed over him. He couldn't put it back. Not now. He had to keep it. With trembling fingers, he carefully folded the receipt and slipped it into his own pocket. The crinkle of the paper a loud, accusatory sound in the sudden silence of the locker room. He quickly closed the team locker, the click of the lock echoing the turmoil in his chest. He moved to his own locker a few doors down, his movements almost robotic. He fumbled with the combination, his mind still reeling from the implications of the receipt. He grabbed his change of clothes, a simple t-shirt and jeans, and his bag, his hands shaking so much that he almost dropped his keys. After a hasty change, he walked back out towards the field where Derek was attempting to organize the boys, who were now growing restless. The earlier vibrancy of the afternoon seemed to have leached away, replaced by a heavy, oppressive atmosphere that Reynolds felt acutely. He approached Coach Derek, forcing a semblance of normalcy onto his face. "Here's the key, Derek," he said, handing back the locker access. He made no mention of the receipt. He couldn't. Not yet. The suspicion was a raw, open wound, and he didn't know how to voice it, or even if he should. "Thanks, Reynolds," Derek replied, taking the key. He glanced at Reynolds' changed attire. "All set, then?" "Yeah," Reynolds managed, his voice sounding distant even to his own ears. He turned to the boys, who were looking at him with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "All right, team, I really have to go. Congratulations again on the win. You were fantastic." He tried to inject some warmth into his voice, but it felt hollow. He paid the referee, the transaction a blur. Then he walked towards the exit of the Riverview Youth Athletics Complex, each step feeling heavier than the last. The sky, which had been threatening rain, finally opened up. A low rumble of thunder sounded in the distance, and a light shower began to fall, quickly intensifying. Reynolds reached his car, the raindrops already beginning to bead on the windshield. As he started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, his thoughts were a chaotic jumble. The police station, the new lead, Cedar Ridge. And now, the receipt. The image of those listed items, Aiden's favorites, was burned into his mind. He glanced back towards the complex. The rain was coming down harder now. He thought about the boys. It seemed less likely now that Derek, with his aversion to inconvenience, would take them for milkshakes in this downpour. A small, selfish part of him was almost relieved. He didn't think he could have faced them, feigning normalcy, with the storm of questions and fears raging inside him. He drove towards the police station, the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers doing little to clear the turmoil in his heart. The drive to the Riverview police station was a blur of rain-streaked streets and the monotonous rhythm of the windshield wipers. Reynolds' mind was a tempest, torn between the fragile hope ignited by the news of a possible sighting of Aiden and the unsettling discovery of the receipt in Derek's jacket. The two thoughts warred within him, each vying for prominence, each carrying its own weight of dread and possibility. When he arrived at the station, a squat, utilitarian building that had become far too familiar to him over the past 4 years, he was met by Officer Miller, a detective who had been assigned to Aiden's case from the beginning. Miller's expression was one of cautious professionalism, a look Reynolds had come to know well, a blend of sympathy and the managed expectations that came with long unsolved cases. "Reynolds, thanks for coming in so quickly," Miller said, his voice low and steady. "Sarah's already here. We've set up in an interview room." Reynolds nodded, his throat tight. He followed Miller through a series of corridors to a small, windowless room where Sarah was waiting. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. She reached out and squeezed his hand as he sat down beside her, her touch a small anchor in the storm of his emotions. "Okay," Officer Miller began, settling into the chair opposite them. "As we mentioned on the phone, we received a call this morning from a woman in Cedar Ridge. She works at a florist shop there. She believes she might have seen a boy matching Aiden's description yesterday afternoon." Reynolds leaned forward, his heart pounding. What did she see? She said a man and a young boy, both wearing raincoats, walked past her shop and entered the general store next door. She'd seen one of Aiden's missing person flyers. We'd circulated them widely in that region a while back, and something about the boy's build and the way he moved caught her attention. She admitted she had her doubts, which is why she didn't report it immediately yesterday. But this morning she was talking to the shopkeeper of the general store, and he mentioned seeing the same pair and also thought the boy looked familiar, though he couldn't place him. Miller turned to a laptop on the table. "The general store has a security camera. It's not the best quality, and the angle isn't ideal, but we have a short clip. I need to warn you, it's very brief, and their faces are partially obscured by the raincoats and the camera position." He clicked a few keys, and a grainy video began to play on the screen. It showed a rain-swept street, a glimpse of a shop window. Then 2 figures, one taller, one smaller, hurried past. The man had his head down, a hood pulled low. The boy, also hooded, was mostly obscured by the man's frame. For a split second, as they turned to enter the doorway of the adjacent store, the boy's face was partially visible. A pale oval, a hint of light-colored hair peeking from under the hood. The man's expression was impossible to discern. Reynolds stared intently at the screen, his breath held. Sarah let out a small, choked sob beside him. The footage looped. Was it Aiden? The build was similar. The height seemed right for a 14-year-old, which Aiden would be now. But the quality was poor, the glimpse too fleeting. The raincoat, the shadows, the rain. It was impossible to be certain. Can you identify him?" Miller asked gently. Reynolds shook his head slowly, a wave of frustration and disappointment washing over him. I don't know. It could be, but I can't say for sure." Sarah echoed his sentiment, her voice trembling. "There's a resemblance, but it's so blurry." Miller nodded understandingly. "We understand. The local sheriff's department in Cedar Ridge is looking into it. They're trying to identify the man and the boy from the footage, checking local records, seeing if anyone in that area recognizes them. We'll update you as soon as we hear anything more." Reynolds felt a familiar weariness settle over him. Another potential lead, another grainy image, another thread of hope that might unravel into nothing. He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the crumpled receipt. The items listed on it flashed in his mind. Strawberry pinwheel candies, the Level 5 puzzle book. "Officer Miller," Reynolds said, pulling out the receipt. "What was the name of the general store the man and boy entered in the footage?" Miller consulted his notes. "It's called the Cedar Creek Emporium, a local general store, sells a bit of everything." Reynolds unfolded the receipt. His eyes scanned the top. The store name printed there was different. Pine Valley Goods and Groceries. And the date? The date on the receipt was from a week ago, not yesterday. A small, almost imperceptible deflation occurred within him. It wasn't the same store, not the same day. "What's that, Reynolds?" Miller asked, noticing the paper in his hand. I found this earlier today," Reynolds said, his voice hesitant. "It was in the team locker at the athletics complex. It caught my eye because of the items listed." He smoothed out the receipt on the table. Sarah leaned closer, her eyes widening as she read the list. She gasped softly and covered her mouth, her gaze flicking up to Reynolds, full of a dawning, horrified understanding. Miller took the receipt and examined it. "Pine Valley Goods and Groceries," he read aloud. "That's also in Cedar Ridge, but it's a different establishment from the Cedar Creek Emporium. And this transaction was a week ago, not yesterday. So it's unlikely to be related to this specific CCTV footage." He looked at the items. Strawberry pinwheel candies, graph puzzle book, Level 5, thermal blankets, child size. He paused. "That particular puzzle book series is quite popular these days, Reynolds. We see them a lot. Many children enjoy them." Reynolds nodded, a hollow feeling in his chest. "I know. Aiden used to ask for the new one as soon as it was released, every Tuesday of the second week of the month, like clockwork." The memory was so vivid, so painful. Miller handed the receipt back to Reynolds. He offered a few more words of encouragement, reiterating that they were doing everything they could, that the Cedar Ridge authorities were actively investigating the sighting. But the air in the room felt heavy, laden with unspoken fears and the crushing weight of uncertainty. Soon after, Reynolds and Sarah exited the station. The rain was still falling, even more heavily now, drumming a relentless tattoo on the pavement and the roofs of parked cars. The gray, weeping sky seemed to mirror the gloom in Reynolds' heart. "You should go home. Get some rest," Sarah said, her voice weary. She looked drained, the brief flicker of hope now extinguished, replaced by a familiar exhaustion. "I think I'll check on the team first," Reynolds replied, his mind still snagged on the receipt and the unsettling questions it raised. "I left them in a bit of a rush. You go on ahead. I'll be home soon." Sarah nodded, too tired to argue. She gave him a brief, tight hug, then walked to her car, her shoulders slumped against the driving rain. Reynolds watched her go, a profound sense of helplessness washing over him. The receipt in his pocket felt like a lead weight, pulling him down into a sea of doubt and suspicion. Reynold climbed back into his car, the interior cool and smelling faintly of damp upholstery. The rain hammered against the windshield, distorting the world outside into a wash of blurred lights and slick dark surfaces. He glanced at the dashboard clock. It had been just over an hour since he'd left the team at the athletics complex. An hour that felt like an eternity, filled with a roller coaster of emotions that had left him feeling raw and exposed. He wondered if Derek had, against the odds and the worsening weather, actually taken the boys to Rosie's Diner for those promised milkshakes. Rosie's was their usual post-game haunt, a cheerful, retro-style diner that served oversized milkshakes and even more oversized burgers. If they were still there, he wanted to catch up, perhaps offer a more coherent apology for his abrupt departure. He tried calling Derek's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Derek wasn't one for lengthy phone conversations, but usually he'd at least pick up. Reynold put the car in drive and pulled away from the police station, heading in the direction of Rosie's. As he drove, his thoughts inevitably circled back to the crumpled receipt in his pocket. Strawberry pinwheel candies. Graph puzzle book, level 5. Child-sized thermal blankets. He knew Derek Maddox reasonably well, or so he had thought. They had coached together for several seasons now, a professional relationship built on a shared, albeit differently expressed, passion for youth soccer. Derek was a private man, a bachelor, so why the bulk purchase of Aiden's favorite candies? Derek never distributed treats to the team. He was more of a discipline and drills kind of coach. And the puzzle book, what possible use would Derek have for a level 5 children's graph puzzle book? And why purchase these items in Cedar Ridge, a town 3 hours away, when they were readily available in any number of stores in Riverview Hollow or the surrounding areas? He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps Derek was going out of town for the weekend, visiting friends who had children of that age. It was plausible. People did that. But the timing felt off. The receipt was dated a week ago. Reynold racked his brain, trying to recall Derek's schedule from the previous week. He didn't remember Derek taking any days off, any absences from their usual coaching commitments. In fact, the date on the receipt, if he recalled correctly, was a Tuesday morning. They'd had practice that Tuesday evening, and Derek had been there, punctual and focused as always. Had he driven 3 hours to Cedar Ridge and back in the morning, just to buy candies and a puzzle book before attending practice? It seemed unlikely, excessive even. Reynolds shook his head, trying to dispel the insidious thoughts that were taking root. This was Derek, his colleague, a man he'd worked alongside, trusted with the well-being of the team. He was a good coach, professional, even if he was a bit sterner with the kids than Reynolds preferred. Many of the boys, while perhaps not loving him in the same way they loved Reynolds, certainly respected and even revered him for his technical knowledge and no-nonsense approach. It was foolish, unfair, to let a simple store receipt cast such a dark shadow of suspicion over him. Derek must have a perfectly rational explanation. He was approaching Rosie's Diner now. He slowed down, peering through the rain-lashed windshield. He was coming from the opposite direction, so the diner was across the street. He could see the familiar neon sign glowing fuzzily through the downpour. And there, in the diner's parking lot, was Derek's dark blue sedan. Relief washed over Reynolds, quickly followed by a renewed sense of unease. So Derek had brought the boys after all. Or had he? As Reynolds scanned the diner's brightly lit interior through its large front windows, he couldn't see any sign of their red and white team jackets. No gaggle of excited boys clustered around a table. The diner looked relatively empty, just a few scattered patrons. Then he saw him. Derek. He was hurrying from the diner's entrance towards his car, hunched against the driving rain. He wasn't empty-handed. He was carrying a large takeaway bag, the kind that could hold several meal containers, and a tray with what looked like multiple large drink cups. Milkshakes, presumably. But there were no children with him. Reynolds quickly rolled down his window just a crack, the cold rain instantly spraying his face. "Derek!" he called out, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind and the drumming of the rain. Derek didn't hear him. He reached his car, fumbled with the door, and quickly got inside, tossing the takeaway onto the passenger seat. Reynold tried calling Derek's phone again, still straight to voicemail. He watched as Derek's car started, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Derek pulled out of the parking spot and began to merge onto the street, heading away from the diner. It was then, as Derek's car turned, that Reynold noticed it. The front passenger side tire. It looked low, distinctly deflated, the rubber bulging slightly at the bottom. In this weather, with the roads so slick, a deflated tire was dangerous. Concern, immediate and genuine, overrode Reynolds' earlier suspicions. He had to warn him. Without a second thought, he made a quick, somewhat risky U-turn across the wet street, earning an indignant honk from an oncoming vehicle. He accelerated, trying to catch up to Derek's sedan. He pulled up behind Derek, maintaining a safe distance, and tried calling his phone one more time. No answer. Frustrated, Reynold flashed his headlights repeatedly and then gave a couple of short, gentle taps on his horn, hoping to get Derek's attention without startling him too much. He saw Derek's right indicator blink. Derek was pulling over to the side of the road. Reynold breathed a sigh of relief and pulled in behind him, parking his own car a few feet back. The rain was relentless, a torrential downpour now. Both men, bracing themselves, exited their cars, the wind whipping the cold rain into their faces. "Derek!" Reynold shouted over the roar of the storm as he approached. "Your front tire, it's looking really deflated. It's not safe to drive on, especially in this weather. The road's like an ice rink." Derek looked surprised and perhaps a little annoyed to see Reynold. He glanced down at his front tire, then back at Reynold. "Oh, yeah, I thought it felt a bit off. Thanks for letting me know, Reynold." He didn't seem overly concerned. "I was just heading to Rosie's to check on you and the boys when I saw you leaving," Reynold explained, shouting to be heard. "Ah," Derek said, wiping rain from his face. "The boys went straight home with their parents. The weather turned too nasty for milkshakes." He then gestured vaguely at his tire. "It's probably just a bit low. I'll make it home all right." "Are you sure?" Reynold pressed, concern etched on his face. "Do you have a spare in the trunk? I can help you change it. No need to worry about the rain. We can get it done quickly." Derek hesitated for a moment, then seemed to relent. "All right, let's take a look, but I'm not sure what condition the spare is in." He walked to the back of his car and opened the trunk. The trunk was cluttered. Jumper cables, a folded blanket, some old newspapers, and a few stray soccer cones. Tucked away in the recess for the spare tire was indeed a spare. But as Derek pulled it out, it was immediately obvious that it was in terrible condition. The rubber was cracked and worn, and it looked almost as deflated as the tire currently on the car. It was clearly very old and hadn't been checked in a long time. As Derek was examining the sorry-looking spare, and before he could close the trunk, Reynolds' gaze snagged on something else nestled amongst the clutter. A flash of familiar color, a specific texture. It was an old, faded hoodie, kid-sized, and it looked exactly like one Aiden used to wear constantly, a navy blue one with a faded skateboarding logo on the front. His heart gave a painful throb. He wanted to ask about it, to voice the sudden, sharp suspicion that lanced through him, but the wind howled around them, and the rain was getting heavier. Derek, seemingly oblivious to Reynolds' scrutiny of the hoodie, sighed in frustration at the state of the spare tire. "Useless," he muttered, shoving it back into the trunk. "Look, Derek," Reynolds said, raising his voice against the elements, "that tire's not safe, and the spare is no better. Let me give you a lift home. We can call for roadside assistance from there. It's no trouble at all." Derek seemed to consider this for a moment, then shook his head. No, it's really fine, Reynold. Thanks for the offer, but like I said, it's just a little deflated. I can still make it home if I drive slowly and carefully. I'll sort it out in the morning." Reynold wasn't convinced, but Derek seemed adamant. "All right then," Reynolds said, a new plan forming in his mind. "If you're sure, then at least let me follow you home. I'll just drive behind you, make sure you get there safely. With this rain and that tire, I'd feel better knowing you made it okay." Derek looked at him, a flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, in his eyes. He thought about it for a brief second. "Okay, Reynold, if you insist. That's very helpful of you." "Thanks." They both hurried back to their respective cars, soaked to the bone despite the short time they'd been outside. Derek started his engine and slowly pulled back onto the road. Reynold followed, maintaining a close but safe distance, his eyes fixed on Derek's car as it navigated the treacherous, rain-slicked streets, his mind a whirl of conflicting emotions and growing unease. The image of that familiar hoodie in Derek's trunk was now seared into his memory, alongside the disturbing contents of the crumpled receipt. The journey to Coach Derek's home was slow and fraught with tension, at least for Reynold. The relentless rain reduced visibility to near zero at times, the wipers struggling to keep the windshield clear. Derek, true to his word, drove exceedingly slowly, his car limping along on the partially deflated tire. Reynold stayed close behind, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel, his gaze flicking between Derek's taillights and the treacherous road ahead. The route took them further and further from the familiar suburban sprawl of Riverview Hollow, towards the more sparsely populated outskirts of town, an area that bordered the dense forest and was characterized by older, larger properties set far back from the road. It was a semi-rural landscape, quiet and somewhat isolated. After what felt like an age but was probably closer to 20 minutes, Derek's indicator blinked, and he turned off the main road onto a long, unpaved driveway, flanked by overgrown bushes and tall, dripping trees. Reynold followed, his car bumping over the uneven surface. The driveway opened into a clearing, revealing a large, somewhat dilapidated two-story house, its paint peeling in places, set well back from the main road. It had an air of faded grandeur, a relic from a bygone era. Derek pulled up near the front porch and switched off his engine. Reynold parked beside him. They had arrived safely, despite the tire and the storm. Derek got out of his car, stretching stiffly. "Well, made it," he said, a hint of relief in his voice. He turned to Reynold. "Thanks again for the escort, Reynold. Really appreciate it. Come on inside. Why don't you? Warm up, dry off. I bought a load of takeaway from Rosie's. Figured I might as well stock up. It's the life of a lone man, you know," he added with a wry, almost self-deprecating smile. "No wife to cook for me, so I often grab enough to last a few days." Reynold, still feeling the chill of the rain, was about to decline, eager to get home to Sarah and process the maelstrom of his thoughts. But Derek's invitation, though perhaps offered out of politeness, felt like an opportunity he shouldn't dismiss too quickly, especially given the unsettling discoveries of the day. "You bought drinks, too, I saw?" Reynold asked, remembering the tray of milkshake cups. 4 of them looked like. That's a lot of protein, even for a coach. He tried to keep his tone light, casual. Derek nodded, not missing a beat. "Yeah, well, a coach still needs a lot of protein, and I like variety." He gestured towards the house. "Seriously, come in for a bit. Have some dinner. It's the least I can do." Reynold hesitated, then nodded. "All right, Derek, just for a little while then. Thanks." He found himself looking around the property as they walked towards the house. "You know, I think this is the first time I've actually been to your place after all these years we've known each other." He took in the expanse of the land, the shadowy outline of trees at its perimeter. "I didn't realize you had such a big property." "The property might be big, but the house is old," Derek said, unlocking the front door. "It's the family home, been in my family for generations, and because it's a bit out of the way, I rarely invite people over. Prefer to meet in town, you know. There's not much out here, really." As he spoke, Reynold noticed Derek's gaze flick momentarily, almost imperceptibly, towards a large, dilapidated barn that stood some distance from the house on the other side of a wide, unkempt lawn. Next to the barn, almost hidden by the gloom and the angle, was a separate, incongruous structure, a large metal storage unit, the kind that resembled a shipping container, though this one appeared to have a modified, more conventional-looking door. Reynolds, following Derek's fleeting glance, pointed towards the structures. "Is that barn yours too? And that container thing?" Derek nodded. "Yeah, family house, family land. The barn belonged to my grandfather. It's mostly full of his old farming equipment and junk. Had to move a lot of the old stuff somewhere when I inherited the place, so I bought that shipping container years ago for extra storage. The barn itself is pretty old and decaying, probably not safe to go into anymore." He quickly changed the subject. "So, are you sure you're not coming in for dinner? I've got burgers, fries, the works." They were at the doorstep now. Reynolds paused. The thought of going inside, of making small talk while his mind was screaming with unanswered questions, felt unbearable. "You know what, Derek, thanks so much for the offer, but I really should be getting home," he said, trying to sound apologetic. "Sarah's waiting, and I need to talk to her about that new lead the police found, the CCTV footage from Cedar Ridge." He briefly explained about the inconclusive sighting, the grainy video. Then, steeling himself, he decided he had to address the receipt. He couldn't leave without asking. "Derek," he began, his voice carefully neutral, "there's actually something I wanted to ask you, and I feel really bad about this, almost like I was snooping, but when I was in the team locker earlier, getting the cash for the ref, a receipt fell out of your jacket." He reached into his pocket and produced the crumpled paper. "I couldn't help but notice the items on it." He held it out. Strawberry pinwheel candies, the Level 5 puzzle book, the child-sized thermal blankets. These were all Aiden's absolute favorite things. I had to ask. What did you buy them for?" Derek's reaction was immediate, though subtle. A brief flicker of something, nervousness, surprise, crossed his face before his expression settled back into its usual stoic mask. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the receipt in Reynolds' hand. The wind whistled around the corners of the old house, and the rain continued its relentless drumming. "Oh, that," Derek said finally, his voice a little too casual. "Right, that was for a friend's child. I was visiting them in Cedar Ridge last week. They live out that way. Their kid loves those candies, and he's really into those puzzle books. The mother asked me to pick up a thermal blanket for him too, as he gets cold easily, and she mentioned it when I told her I was going shopping." He offered a small, dismissive shrug. "Just doing a favor." Reynolds searched Derek's face, looking for any sign of deception, any crack in the plausible explanation. But Derek's gaze was steady, his demeanor composed. It sounded reasonable, perfectly reasonable. A wave of shame washed over Reynolds. He had let his grief and suspicion run wild, accusing a colleague, a friend, based on a piece of paper. "Oh," Reynolds said, feeling foolish. "Okay, I'm sorry, Derek. I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. It's just, seeing those specific items, it brought everything back." He folded the receipt and put it back in his pocket, the gesture feeling like an admission of his own paranoia. "No problem, Reynolds," Derek said, his voice softening slightly. "I can't imagine how hard it must be, losing a child like that. Every little thing must be a reminder." There was an awkward pause. "Well," Reynolds said, "maybe tomorrow morning, if you still need a hand with that tire, I can come by and help you out." "No, don't worry about it," Derek replied quickly. "I'll get it sorted. I'll call a mobile mechanic or something." Then another image flashed in Reynolds' mind, the hoodie in the trunk. He had to ask. It felt like a loose end, another piece of the unsettling puzzle. "Derek, one more thing, and again, I hope you don't mind me asking. When you opened your trunk earlier, I thought I saw an old kid's hoodie in there. A navy blue one?" This time, Derek's reaction was more pronounced. He visibly tensed, his eyes darting away for a split second before meeting Reynolds again. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He seemed genuinely surprised and undeniably nervous. "A hoodie?" he repeated, as if stalling for time. "Oh, that." "Right. That. That belonged to one of the boys from the old team, a few seasons back. He must have left it in my car after a game. I found it ages ago, kept meaning to return it. But then he moved away, or aged out of the team, I can't remember which. It's just been rattling around in there ever since. Keep forgetting about it." He gave a short, forced laugh. The explanation felt flimsy, less convincing than the one about the receipt. But Reynolds had already pushed so much. He didn't know what else to say, how to challenge it without sounding completely accusatory. Derek seemed eager to end the conversation. "Look, Reynolds, you should really be on your way before this weather gets even worse. You don't want to get stuck out here. It's getting late and cold." He gestured vaguely towards Reynolds' car. Reynolds nodded slowly. "Yeah, you're right. I should go." He backed away from the porch. "Thanks again for everything." "No problem," Derek said, already turning to go inside. "Drive safe." He disappeared into the house, closing the door firmly behind him. Reynolds walked back to his car, his mind in turmoil. He felt a confusing mix of relief and lingering doubt. Derek's explanations, on the surface, seemed plausible enough. He berated himself internally. He was being foolish, letting his grief cloud his judgment, suspecting his colleague because of a store receipt and an old piece of clothing. Aiden was missing, and the police had a potential lead, however tenuous. That's where his focus should be. He should trust the professionals, wait for their updates, not go around accusing innocent people based on circumstantial coincidences. He started his car, the engine rumbling to life, a stark contrast to the oppressive quiet of the isolated property. He needed to get home. He needed to talk to Sarah. He needed to stop thinking. Reynolds put his car into reverse, his headlights cutting a swathe through the rain-swept darkness as he began to back out of Derek's long, unpaved driveway. The isolation of the property felt more pronounced now, the dense trees pressing in on either side, their branches skeletal and grasping in the dim light. He reached the end of the driveway and paused before pulling out onto the main road, realizing with a jolt that he wasn't entirely sure of the quickest way back to his own neighborhood from this unfamiliar, semi-rural part of town. The drive here, following Derek, had been focused on safety, not navigation. He shifted the car into park just outside Derek's property line, partially concealed by a thicket of rain-lashed rhododendrons and the overhanging branches of a large cedar tree. He pulled out his phone, intending to use its GPS to map his route home. As he did, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Sarah. "Reynolds, where are you? Are you okay?" Her voice was tight with worry. "Hi, Sarah. Yeah, I'm okay," he reassured her. "I was just at Derek's place. His tire was flat, so I followed him home to make sure he got here all right. I'm just about to head back now, just trying to figure out the best way." His voice trailed off. As he was speaking, his gaze drifted across the dark expanse of Derek's property. His eyes were drawn to the metal storage unit, the one that looked like a shipping container, standing stark and incongruous beside the decaying barn. And then he saw it. A tiny pinprick of red light blinking from the side of the container near the modified door. It blinked again, and again, not randomly. There was a pattern to it. "Reynolds, are you still there?" Sarah's voice sounded distant, tinny in his ear. He didn't answer immediately, his attention wholly captivated by the blinking light. Long, short, long. Pause. Short, short, short. Pause. It was deliberate. He watched, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs with a sudden, sickening premonition. He knew Morse code, a skill picked up during a brief stint in the Army Reserves years ago, a skill he hadn't thought about in decades. But it came back to him now, fragmented but insistent. I-H-U-N-G-R-Y. "I'm hungry." The message repeated, the small red light blinking its desperate plea into the stormy night. A cold dread, far more potent than anything he had felt before, seized him. His breath hitched. He was still partially on the phone with Sarah, but the world seemed to narrow to that blinking red light and the horrifying implication of its message. Then, as if on cue, The front door of Derek's house opened. A rectangle of yellow light spilled out onto the dark, wet ground. Derek emerged, silhouetted against the light from within. He was carrying something, a takeaway box, similar to the ones Reynolds had seen him with earlier, and one of those tall milkshake cups. Concealed by the trees and the darkness just beyond the property line, Reynolds watched, frozen, as Derek walked purposefully across the muddy lawn, not towards the main house's kitchen or living room, but directly towards the metal storage unit. He reached the modified door, fumbled with something on the lock, a keypad perhaps, or a heavy-duty padlock, and then, with a metallic groan that was barely audible over the rain, he pulled up what looked like a rolling steel shutter door. He stooped slightly and disappeared inside. Reynolds' world tilted. Suddenly, everything, the receipt with Aiden's favorite things, the child-sized thermal blankets, the specific puzzle book, Derek's nervousness, the out-of-place hoodie, the bulk purchase of food and milkshakes, the isolated property, the reinforced storage unit, it all clicked together with a horrifying, undeniable clarity. He still couldn't fully believe the monstrous thought forming in his mind, but the evidence was rapidly, terrifyingly becoming insurmountable. "Reynolds, what's wrong? Talk to me." Sarah's voice, now frantic, crackled from the phone. "Sarah?" he said, his own voice hoarse, unrecognizable. "Sarah, I have to go. I'll call you back. I promise." He ended the call before she could protest, his fingers fumbling, his mind racing. He immediately dialed 911, then, remembering Officer Miller's direct line from earlier, he quickly found it in his recent calls and dialed that instead, hoping to get a faster, more informed response. It rang twice before Miller picked up. "Miller? Officer Miller, it's Reynolds Mercer," he said, his voice tight with urgency, trying to keep the rising panic at bay. "I'm at Derek Maddox's house, the other coach. I think he has someone in a storage container on his property. I saw a Morse code signal, 'I'm hungry,' and then I saw him take food and a drink into it." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Reynolds, are you sure? Do you think it's Aiden? Are you sure your son is inside that container?" Miller's voice was sharp, professional. "No, I'm not sure it's Aiden," Reynolds admitted, the words tearing at him. "I don't know who it is, but I'm sure about the Morse code, and I'm sure I saw Derek take food in there, right after the signal. Someone is in there. He wouldn't be eating alone in a storage container in this weather, responding to a light signal." "Okay, Reynolds, stay where you are. Do not engage. Do not approach the container. We're dispatching a unit immediately. Give me the exact address again. We'll be there as fast as we can, probably within 10 minutes, maybe less, depending on traffic and weather." Reynolds repeated the address, his voice trembling. He hung up, his gaze fixed on the dark, silent storage unit. The red light had stopped blinking. Derek was still inside. The wait for the police felt like an eternity. Each minute stretched, taut and unbearable. He kept watching the container, his imagination running wild with horrific possibilities. With every passing second, the conviction grew stronger. Someone was being held in that unit. Why else would Derek be taking food there? Who was sending signals for help? The questions pounded in his head, fueling a rising tide of fear and a desperate, sickening hope. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime but was probably closer to 8 or 9 minutes, he saw the distant flash of blue and red lights cutting through the rain-swept darkness. 2 police cruisers, sirens off to ensure a quiet approach for what was now being treated as a potential welfare check or hostage situation, turned onto Derek's driveway. They pulled up near Reynolds' concealed car. Officer Miller was in the first car. He got out, along with another uniformed officer, their expressions grim. "Reynolds," Miller said, his voice low. "Show us." Reynolds pointed towards the storage unit, his hand shaking. "He's still in there. He went in about 10 minutes ago with food." "All right, you wait here with Officer Davies," Miller instructed, gesturing to the second officer who had emerged from the other cruiser along with a third. "We'll handle this." "No," Reynolds said, his voice firm. It was my colleague's property. If it's Aiden or any child, I need to see." I need to be there. He knew the potential fallout. If he was wrong, if this was all some terrible misunderstanding, his relationship with Derek would be irreparably destroyed, his reputation perhaps tarnished by his wild accusations. But if he was right, if Aiden or any child was in there, he had to know, he had to save them. Miller looked at him, then nodded curtly. All right, but you stay behind us, at a safe distance. Do not interfere. Understood? Reynolds nodded, his throat dry. The three officers, Miller in the lead, moved cautiously across the muddy lawn towards the storage unit, their flashlights cutting beams through the darkness and the still falling rain. Reynolds followed a few paces behind Officer Davies, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. As they reached the metal door of the storage unit, Miller raised his hand, signaling for quiet. Then he knocked loudly on the steel. "Police! Mr. Maddox, open up!" Silence. Only the sound of the rain and the wind. Miller knocked again, harder this time. "Derek Maddox, this is the police. Open the door." After a few tense moments, there was a scraping sound from within, and the rolling steel door began to rise slowly, revealing a dimly lit interior. Derek Maddox stood there, blinking in the sudden glare of their flashlights, his face a mask of shock and bewilderment. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice laced with indignation. "Officers? Reynolds? What is this?" "Mr. Maddox," Officer Miller said, his voice calm but firm. "We've received a report of someone potentially being kept in this storage unit against their will. We need to check inside." Derek's eyes darted to Reynolds, his expression shifting from confusion to a dawning, annoyed comprehension. "Kept in here? Are you serious? That's ridiculous. There's no one in here but me." He stepped aside, gesturing vaguely into the cluttered space. "See for yourselves." Two officers moved past him, their flashlights sweeping the interior. It was crammed with old furniture covered in dust sheets, boxes piled high, tools, and various other discarded items. After a thorough search, they found no one. Reynolds' heart sank. Had he been wrong? Had he imagined the Morse code? Misinterpreted everything? "I told you," Derek said, a note of smug triumph in his voice. "There's no one here." "I saw the Morse code," Reynolds insisted, his voice desperate. "And I saw you bring food in here. Where's the food you brought in?" The officers looked at Derek, waiting for an explanation. Derek scoffed. "The food was for me. I often eat out here when I'm sorting through stuff. My tire's deflated, Reynolds, you know that. I was just taking a break." But the officers and Reynolds noted the absence of any recently consumed food containers or drink cups. There was no sign of the takeaway box or the milkshake. "I think he's lying," Reynolds said, his gaze sweeping the floor of the unit, his eyes fixed on a section of old, worn carpet near a stack of boxes. There were distinct wear and tear marks around its edges, as if it was frequently moved. "What's under that carpet?" One of the officers moved towards it, pushed aside a heavy crate, and pulled back the edge of the carpet. Underneath, set flush with the concrete floor, was a wooden trapdoor with a recessed metal ring handle. Derek's composure finally cracked. His face went pale. That's just an old root cellar access. It's been sealed for years." But the fresh scuff marks around the trapdoor told a different story. Officer Miller nodded to one of his men, who pulled open the trapdoor. It revealed a dark, narrow opening leading down into a crawlspace tunnel. A dank, musty smell wafted up. At that moment, the demeanor of the officers changed. Two of them moved to flank Derek, their hands resting near their service weapons. "Mr. Maddox, I'm going to ask you to step outside, please," Miller said, his voice now devoid of any pretense. Two officers, flashlights held ready, carefully lowered themselves into the crawlspace. Reynolds held his breath, his entire being focused on that dark hole in the ground. The silence stretched, broken only by the muffled sounds of the officers moving below. Then a voice from the tunnel. "We've got him! We've found a boy down here!" A wave of dizziness washed over Reynold. He stumbled, and Officer Davies put a steadying hand on his arm. A few minutes later, which felt like an eternity, one of the officers emerged from the tunnel, followed by his partner, who was carefully helping a small, frail figure. It was a boy, his face pale and grimy, his eyes wide and blinking in the sudden light. He was thin, almost emaciated, and looked utterly terrified. It was Aiden. Reynold gasped, a strangled sob escaping his lips. His son, his Aiden, alive. The officers explained that the tunnel led to a chamber, a sort of makeshift bunker that had been dug out beneath the storage unit. It looked like it might have once been a prepper-style survival shelter, but it had been converted, its walls insulated and soundproofed with panels. There was a basic ventilation system, cleverly disguised on the outside as a pile of old wooden boxes and crates near an old vent shaft, and a power supply running from a hidden generator line. Derek, now surrounded, began to curse and shout, his face contorted with rage and despair. "He didn't deserve him," he screamed at Reynold, his voice cracking. "You didn't deserve your perfect life, your perfect son." Police officers quickly and firmly placed him under arrest, cuffing him and reading him his rights as he continued to rave. Paramedics, who had been called to the scene as a precaution, were now rushing forward. They carefully brought Aiden out of the storage unit and towards the waiting ambulance. Aiden looked weak, miserable, and deeply traumatized. When his eyes, still adjusting to the light, finally focused on Reynold, who was waiting anxiously by the ambulance, his expression was one of utter shock, then a strange, heartbreaking fear. "Dad!" Aiden whispered, his voice raspy from disuse or emotion. He began to cry, not tears of relief, but of confusion and terror. Am I seeing a ghost? You're supposed to be dead." Reynold's heart shattered. "What? Aiden, no? What are you talking about?" "Coach Derek, he told me," Aiden choked out between sobs. "He said you and Mom and all my friends from the soccer team, you were all killed in a wild shooting incident. After the competition years ago, he said he saved me. He said he was keeping me safe in the bunker because bad people were still hunting me, trying to kill me." Reynold knelt beside his son, tears streaming down his own face. "Aiden, no, that's not true. There was no shooting. I've been looking for you every single day for 4 years. Your mother and I, we never stopped looking." Aiden stared at him, his brow furrowed in confusion. "So, no one is hunting me? I'm not in danger?" "No, sweetheart," Reynold said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were never in danger from anyone but him. Derek kidnapped you. He took you away and locked you up here all this time." "He didn't lock me up all the time," Aiden said, a strange note of defensiveness in his voice. "He let me come out sometimes, under disguise, just once a week, usually. And sometimes he'd let me come upstairs into the locked unit to play or to shower. He even gave me enough food and candy if I was good. And if I was really good and obedient, he'd get me the puzzle books." The paramedics gently intervened, asking Reynold for permission to check Aiden over properly. As one of the medics began a gentle assessment, Reynold noticed Aiden flinch repeatedly when certain parts of his body were touched. When the medic gently asked if anything hurt, Aiden, his voice barely a whisper, expressed pain in his private area. The medic's expression became grave as they noted down the symptoms. A detective who had arrived with the backup units approached Reynold. "Mr. Mercer, we need to ask Aiden some questions, very gently, about his time with Mr. Maddox." He then turned to Aiden, his voice soft. "Aiden, can you tell us what Mr. Maddox has been doing to you?" Hesitantly, Aiden began to speak. He described how Derek would conduct frequent fitness checks, his small voice trembling as he recounted details of inappropriate touching and invasive examinations. Derek had manipulated him, telling him, "This is how professionals do it," coercing his silence through a twisted combination of guilt, threats, and the psychological manipulation that he was being kept safe. Aiden then revealed his voice even smaller, that Coach Derek had been inappropriate with him even before the kidnapping, when he was much younger, but he hadn't understood then that it was wrong. The medic and the detective exchanged a grim look. The medic quietly informed Reynold that they needed to take Aiden to the hospital immediately for a full examination, as they strongly suspected he had been a victim of prolonged abuse. The detective assured Reynold they would meet him at the hospital to take a more formal statement later. Reynold nodded, numb with horror and a searing rage towards Derek. He watched as Aiden was carefully placed in the ambulance. He would follow them, leaving the police and forensic teams to begin the painstaking work of dismantling Derek's den of horrors and collecting the evidence of his monstrous crimes. The sterile, brightly lit corridors of Riverview General Hospital felt a world away from the rain-lashed darkness of Derek Maddox's property. Aiden was taken immediately to the emergency room for a comprehensive examination. Reynold had called Sarah from the ambulance, his voice choked with a torrent of emotions, relief, horror, disbelief, as he tried to explain the unthinkable. Aiden was alive, Aiden was found, Aiden had been with Derek all along. Sarah arrived at the hospital in a state of near collapse, her face a mask of shock and dawning joy, quickly followed by an overwhelming wave of grief and anger as Reynold haltingly recounted what little he knew of Aiden's ordeal. They clung to each other in a quiet waiting area, the silence punctuated by Sarah's ragged sobs. "All this time," Sarah whispered, her voice raw with pain. 4 years. He was right there. That man, he coached with you, Reynold. He was at our house for team parties before. How could we not have known? We should have gone to his house. We should have suspected." Her words were a torrent of self-recrimination and anguish. Reynold held her tighter, his own guilt a heavy stone in his chest. They had trusted Derek, seen him as a colleague, never imagining the depths of darkness he concealed. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor emerged from the ER. She had a kind, serious face. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," she began gently, "we've completed Aiden's initial examination." She led them to a private consultation room and proceeded to explain Aiden's condition. The news was devastating. The physical evidence confirmed their worst fears. Aiden had endured significant abuse. He had developed a severe infection in his private parts, a direct result of repeated trauma, and was already started on a strong course of antibiotics. There were also numerous traumatic bruises, old and new, across his back and limbs, consistent with manhandling and rough treatment. Furthermore, he was suffering from malnutrition and vitamin deficiencies, the inevitable consequence of being kept underground for extended periods with a restricted and inadequate diet. The emotional trauma, the doctor cautioned, would require long-term specialist support. As they were absorbing this horrific information, Officer Miller and another detective arrived at the hospital. They waited patiently while the doctor finished, then gently asked if Reynold was up to giving a full statement. In a quiet room with Sarah by his side, Reynold recounted every detail of the evening, from the initial phone call about the Cedar Ridge sighting to the chilling discovery at Derek's property. When he had finished, Officer Miller shared what they had learned from their preliminary interrogation of Derek Maddox. Derek, it turned out, was a professionally qualified youth coach, but he had long harbored a deep-seated resentment towards Reynold. He felt overshadowed, believing Reynold was more beloved by the kids, constantly received praise from parents and the wider soccer community, and was lauded for coaching with passion and heart, not ego. Derek, in contrast, had a more rigid, results-driven philosophy. He wanted to train the boys hard, push them towards competitive league play, and he viewed Reynolds' more nurturing approach as too soft, as babying the players. This resentment festered, morphing into a poisonous envy. He envied the children's unwavering loyalty to Reynold, their infectious joy when playing under his guidance, and the way they seemed to play harder, with more spirit, when Reynold was on the sidelines. He came to see Reynolds' son, Aiden, bright, talented, obedient, and universally praised, as the embodiment of everything Reynold had that he coveted. A twisted, obsessive desire began to form in Derek's mind, to take away what Reynolds loved most, to shatter his perfect life, believing this would somehow right the perceived wrongs, somehow elevate his own status or validate his own methods. The abuse, the control, the years of captivity, it was all a horrifying form of revenge. His chilling words during the arrest echoed in Reynolds' mind. "You took the team from me. I took your boy." Reynolds and Sarah listened in stunned silence, the revelation hitting them with the force of a physical blow. They had never suspected such a bitter rivalry, such a deep-seated malice. They had always considered Derek a somewhat reserved but ultimately harmless colleague. The idea that this quiet, unassuming man had been capable of such calculated cruelty, such profound evil, was almost impossible to comprehend. Reynolds then asked the question that had been burning in his mind. How had Derek managed to kidnap Aiden that day, 4 years ago? Officer Miller explained. After the tournament win, the one from which Aiden had vanished, Derek, as the assistant coach, had offered to take some of the team's gear back to the van alone. Aiden, always eager to help, had stayed behind to assist Derek with loading the balls and cones. It was then that Derek had lured him towards his own vehicle, which was parked in a more secluded area, claiming he had a new puzzle book, one of Aiden's weaknesses, that he wanted to show him. Once Aiden was close enough, Derek had incapacitated him using a cloth laced with a powerful sedative, likely procured through illicit channels, perhaps from a shady acquaintance or even a veterinary supply. The post-tournament celebration was chaotic, families were scattered, and amidst the joyful pandemonium, it took hours before anyone realized Aiden was truly missing. Derek, with cold precision, had tampered with the nearest CCTV camera overlooking that section of the parking lot and used a little-known utility gate exit to leave the complex with Aiden hidden in his large van, long before the alarm was raised. The police also confirmed that their investigation into the Cedar Ridge receipt and the store visits provided a grim insight. It appeared Derek would occasionally take Aiden out, heavily disguised, to that faraway town. These outings were infrequent, perhaps once every few weeks, and were framed as rewards for Aiden's good behavior, meaning his obedience, his submission to the abuse. The candies, the puzzle books, were all part of this horrific manipulation. In addition to the physical and psychological abuse, Derek had systematically forced Aiden into a state of complete dependency. He controlled his access to food, using it as a tool for reward and punishment. He isolated him from any semblance of normal reality, meticulously grooming him over the years to believe that the outside world was a dangerous place, that his family was gone, and that Coach Derek is the only one who didn't give up on you. Aiden wasn't locked in the underground chamber constantly. Derek had created a complex and terrifying false narrative, convincing the boy that he was a fugitive, hunted, and that the bunker and Derek himself were his only salvation. As the detectives were concluding their update, the door to the waiting area opened, and a small group of people entered, several boys from Reynolds' current soccer team accompanied by their parents. News, especially news of this magnitude, traveled fast in their close-knit community. Sarah had likely, in her distress, called one of the other soccer moms, and the word had spread like wildfire. The children's faces were a mixture of shock, concern, and a dawning understanding of the gravity of what had happened. As they gathered, and upon seeing the police officers, a ripple of unease went through them. Then, emboldened by each other's presence and perhaps the gravity of the situation, 2, then 3, of the young boys from the current team stepped forward hesitantly. They quietly, tearfully, began to tell the officers that Coach Maddox had also been inappropriate towards them. Touches that made them uncomfortable, comments that felt wrong, fitness checks that were too personal. The detectives listened patiently, their expressions hardening further. They assured the parents and the brave young boys that they would investigate these new allegations thoroughly. They would need their witness statements, their courage to speak up, to ensure that Derek Maddox faced the full force of the law for all his crimes, to make certain he would be locked away for a very, very long time, never again able to harm another child. Later, after the initial medical treatments and when Aidan was settled in a private room, Reynold and Sarah were allowed to sit with him. He was exhausted, traumatized, but the terror in his eyes had begun to recede, replaced by a profound weariness and a dawning awareness of his rescue. In a small, weak voice, Aidan looked at Reynold. "Dad," he whispered, "I haven't played soccer in such a long time." A tiny, fragile smile touched his lips. "When I get better, can I play again?" Tears welled in Reynold's eyes. He reached out and gently took his son's hand, marveling at the resilience of the human spirit, at the flicker of hope that still burned within this child who had endured so much. "Yes, Aidan," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, you can. Whenever you're ready, we'll play again." The road to healing would be long and arduous, for Aidan, for their family, and for their community. But in that small hospital room, surrounded by the quiet hum of medical equipment and the unwavering presence of his parents, a new journey had begun, a journey back towards light, towards healing, and towards the simple joy of a boy and his love for the game. The nightmare was over. The slow, painful dawn was breaking.